Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Good Journeys Tarot. Today, in our 78 cards and 78 weeks project, I will be looking at the moon. And I'll just tell you right now that it's been a very difficult card to work with. But before we get to that, as I always do, I'd like to share what's been going on here. And I don't really have a lot, not much has come in. I am getting near the end of my uh, Kabbalah class, studying the Tree of Life. And we're going to be talking about that as we talk about this card. In a serendipitous kind of way. And I am about to start vacation. So there will not be one of these broadcasts next week on the 17th. I'll be skipping that Sunday and we'll be working the card the following week to post on the 24th. But there will be some other videos popping up here and there, I think, during the course of the week. And I am doing my daily card polls, at least until I leave town on Wednesday for Instagram, which is something new I've started. I've been doing my weekly Journey Ahead spread for everyone, and also pulling individual cards, which I interpret based on that original week ahead spread. One thing did come in this week on the spur of the moment. I bought the Witch's Roots from September. They had some extra copies, and it's been a while since I've had some of their incense and their oil, and it featured runes. And so I was very excited about that. Along with the runes, it featured thyme, which I love the smell of, and it has some great purposes apart from smelling good and tasting good, right? One of the reasons I'm showing this to you is that I want to ask a question of the hive mind out there. And I know that Nina from Shuffle Tarot will know this right away. Perhaps someone else will. But on here, you'll see that Othello and Dagaz, the last two there, it's my understanding there is some disagreement about which one comes before the other, as far as which one's first, which one's last. But in all of the books I've read and all of the websites I've reviewed, they've always had the same meanings, right? So Othello being the ancestry, inheritance, image, and then Degas being the one for daylight, awakening, that type of thing. But on the witch's moon here, it's reversed. And I don't know if that's specific to the person who designed this, or if I've just overlooked that in my studies, that not only is the position of these in the order of the alphabet different, but are they in fact not certain which one is which as far as the meaning. And I'll tell you, because I am a person of order and structure, I had to correct my magical oil. They put this beautiful blue bottle in there with this beautiful smelling anointing oil that is, it has this sweet earthy feel. It's not a harsh kind of smell. Now, the longer you smell it, the more you'll get that sandalwood smell. But when you initially smell it, you get the thyme and the more light, fragrant earthiness. But I had to actually edit it, and I had to change it to Degas because that's what I associate with awakening, which is what this oil was designed for. But they had Othello on here, and that made no sense to me. So I had to change it. So if you know why it might be reversed on here, let me know. I'm used to the letters being in different orders, but the meaning I've never seen reversed that way. So that was curious to me. The other thing that I in here was the runes, and I took them out for a reason and then put them back, is that they all had these little moons on them. And so I colored in the moon so that the moon would be distinct from the rune, or vice versa anyway. Because before they both were outlines, and so it looked like the moon was part of the rune itself. So this way it looks different. I want to color in the runes in black, but I haven't gotten brave enough to do that yet because the ink that I used to do the moon, I don't actually have that same pen in black. And so it would be experimenting with a different ink and not knowing how it would take. So we'll see. I may come back and do that at some point. Let's see. And I think that's pretty much the only new thing. I do have one other question for the hive mind before we get started talking about the moon. And that is if anyone can tell me why the star, which is associated with Aquarius, would be wearing a um, scarf with the Earth alchemical sign on it. Um, it is bugging me. I am really loving working with the Numinous Tarot. It is basically my go-to deck right now. But for some reason, this is bugging me because the star is one of my vital cards in the tarot. And I thought maybe it was a classical association versus a modern association. But my understanding is that classically it was associated with water, and in modern days we're associating it with air. I think either or works for Aquarius, but I don't understand why the earth symbol there on this card. And you may not be able to make it out. At first I thought, well, maybe it's the air sign, but it's reversed because of the way the scarf is hanging. But literally they are all drawn so that as they come down, they look like the earth. It's not a case of where that maybe the air symbol is upside down on one side. It's all of them were drawn that way. So if you have an idea, there's another question for you. So let's talk about this card. And as I do this video, I want you to pay attention to some of the things that I am doing and offer your input and advice as well in the comments. Do you prefer it when I hold up cards for you? Or do you prefer it when I have images that I display on my computer, such as I'm going to do shortly? What is best for you? So the moon is a complicated card for many reasons. One is that there's not like common agreement on its meaning and purpose in the tarot. Benebell Wynn, I believe, mentioned this in her Holistic Tarot. There's not a commonality among people who write about the moon and read about the moon. In fact, when I was studying the moon, there are actually two conflicting ideas about this path and the pillars. Well, one idea that I saw in Rachel Pollack's book is exactly the opposite of what I saw in another book. One views it as you are leaving this pool of intuition and entering into a secret place. The other views it as you have actually come out of somewhere to this secret place. So that's one thing to think about. The other is that many times people view this as like the polar opposite of the sun being joy, happiness, contentment, excitement, all of that. And then the moon being, your shadow and, craziness, lunacy, howling at the moon, that type of thing. And I think that a little bit of both can be true. And we're going to explore that as we talk about these cards. But first, let's go ahead and look at some of my favorite cards from my own collection. The first one is from the Slow Tarot. In this one, you see the dog and the wolf there, like you might see in the Waite Smith image. You see the waxing crescent moon. And that is something else that is not agreed upon in the Waite Smith card, is whether the depiction here is of the sun illuminating a waxing crescent with the face of wisdom there in the card, or if this is simply the full moon shining. So, those are things that we will talk to in correlation to my understanding of the card. This is the Spacious Tarot. It is just the moon, big and silver in the sky, above some plants that have specific significance to the moon. Here we see some Egyptian mythos being brought in. We also see the moon cycles. This is the Lost Hollow Tarot. And then we get into some cards that are more reflective, as we did see in the Lost Hollow. And that is, for example, the Golden Thread. You'll see the association with Pisces there with the fish, the moon being reflected in the water as the fish. This is a beautiful image. I love this deck. I haven't worked with this deck a lot recently, but I used to work with it all of the time when I would go into the office to work during the day, because it's plastic and I wasn't worried about it getting ruined like some of my paper cards, because you never know what your coworkers are going to spill on a table, right? So, the idea of reflection is again here in the Modern Love Tarot. In this card, you'll see there is one person. When they do a similar thing with people staring up at the stars and the star card in this deck, and in that case, it's actually a couple, because that the deck is called the Modern Love. But this is much more a personal introspection, and we'll get to that. This card actually very closely resembles the card I ended up creating, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. Welcome, Strength Reverse. Glad that you could be here. I've just really gotten started. I'm going through some of the cards in my deck that I love regarding the moon. I'm up to the Light Seers, which is also a beautiful concept of reflection, but also this kind of idea of us being in this kind of surreal place. You know, we're under the water, we're peering up at the moon. But again, the idea of duality represented in the dog and the wolf, like we see in many cards. And then in this card, which is from the Ellis deck, we start to see that idea of connecting witches or the pagan with the moon, as we see the being reflected in the water there. You'll again see the canines howling at the moon and the magic happening around it, which is quite beautiful. This Might Hurt brings in people as well, making them the dog and the wolf, which is a concept that we're going to be talking about a little bit in the future. As well, depicting that kind of dichotomy that exists in this card between our intuition and our instinct, between our domestic self or our, logical self, and then our primal or, wild self, as it were. This is from the Bumstone and Earth Flash, where we see someone dancing under the moonlight in the water. I love this depiction. It's beautiful. This is kind of a happier type of look at the moon than we see in some cards. And here is from my Goblin Tarot. I usually take this out in October to play with. It's actually a really pretty deck, and I love the way emotion was connected in this deck. This goblin riding this dog here, and them kind of howling at the moon as they go to war. And there's this great story about riding this dog throughout the deck. It is actually featured in the Three of Swords as the one who has been pierced. And that was the card that really connected me with the Three of Swords at one time. So my favorite card in my collection for the moon kind of combines all of these ideas that we've been seeing. The moon cycles, that idea of the dichotomy of self versus our tame versus wild side, our instinct versus our intuition, the dog and the wolf, and that kind of reflection feeling. And that is from the Lily White Tarot. So you can see here again, the person is the canine, that piece of self that is domestic. Reflecting upon the water is actually the wolf for that instinctive side. And there we'll see the moon phases on the right-hand side and the moon being reflected in the water. So I do love this image of the moon. So now that we've looked at some of my favorite cards, let's talk about the moon in general. So the moon, as we saw in our golden thread card, is related to Pisces, that zodiac of the emotion. And it also is associated with Neptune, which is associated with secrets. This card is very much tied to the High Priestess. In fact, they have some of the same keywords, like your subconscious, like a mystery, secrets, all of that kind of thing. Now, in Rachel Pollack's book, she tries to differentiate this as secrets from within, i.e., the High Priestess, and secrets that we find outside of ourselves in the moon. And she makes this point, and some others have, that in the moon, there is not a human being because the moon is not about our inner search, it's about our outer search. But that's not something that everybody agrees on. Like I said earlier, you find conflicting views of what the moon means and even what the symbols in it represent. There's not a consistent view of it, even from book to book or reader to reader. I tend to look at it as more of an opportunity to reflection. Others tend to look at it as a shadow card where, it's having a negative influence on your life. I think both of those can be true. So in the Rider-Waite image, we see a crayfish, which most people agree relates to our intuitive ability. Waite equates this with our fear and anxiety, the anthropod being a small creature, but having an outer shell has a way of protecting itself from danger, from those anxieties and fears, right? Hi, Kelly Bear. Glad to see you here. Strength Reverse is also here, and I am well into talking about the moon. And now we're talking about the symbology in the moon. I'm going to hold up my coloring of the moon just because it's larger. We talked a little bit about the crayfish and how it can symbolize your intuition and coming out of that pool of intuition. And the only thing I really changed in the image was I reflected the moon in the water. And there is a little bit of disagreement about what this path is. In some books, it's described as a flowing river, a golden flowing river. And in other places, it's described as a path. So like a walking path, like a dirt path. Sometimes they talk about it being you coming into a place to use your intuition and discover secrets, right? And then other times they talk about you are being told to apply those secrets to the real world. And so this is your path back to reality. I think both of those can be true. And in a way of demonstrating this, I have been studying the Kabbalah Tree of Life for the last 6 weeks. And the moon falls on path 29, which is our path of wisdom between Malkuth and Netzach. And I'm turning here to the image here to show you that. So here it is. It's flowing from here. Not coordinated, am I? So it's flowing between the green dot and the bottom dot there. And so that path, which, come on, Rosemary, that path, path 29, the moon flows from our earthly space to that space where we realize we are related to other people, that there is a relationship there. And so from earth to fire through water, basically, is the path that we're taking. But that path goes both ways, right? So why shouldn't this path in the moon card go both ways? Why can't this be about both coming into our intuition and taking our intuition back to the world? Right, Kelly Bear. And that's because it is, there's just not agreement from person to person about what the moon actually says. And uh, I have tried to pull all of this information together for myself in a way that kind of makes sense to me. And so I look at it from the positive standpoint of it's an opportunity for reflection and viewing your inner self, your life, and what is balancing that wild side with your tame side, your instincts with your intuition at its very best. But then also as reverse, perhaps we see it more as that illusion or mystery or shadow that is clouding over everything. That's just the way I'm looking at it after having done some reading, not necessarily the way it should be. I guess, we all read very differently. The moon is a card that is often associated with femininity. So there is a sense of sensuality to the moon. And it can be associated with dreams. It can be associated with choice. And that choice relates to those two towers in that path and those two dogs and that duality that exists within us. And at night, when it is dark, that moonlight is different than the daylight. So it takes more for us to focus. And so that's why it tends to be a longer process of understanding because we have to adjust to this new light and this new vision that we're looking at. I want to talk a little bit now about why I found this card so hard to create for myself. And that's because I had a very specific idea of what I wanted my moon card to look like. There's like this vision in my head from my childhood, and every image that I pulled up, I kept getting more and more realistic images, which didn't really correspond with the cards that I had been mocking up during this process. And I couldn't find exactly the right image because I have this picture in my mind of what this card looks like in my head. So when I was a kid, we would spend all of our school breaks and summer breaks and that type of thing at the lake where my dad could fish. That's the only vacation he ever wanted to take. And he had a friend with a house at the lake. It was a trailer in this group of trailers on the lake. And so he and his friend would go fishing all day on the lake. And the moms and the kids would stay there at the trailer and swim and fish off the piers, docks, that kind of thing. I always hated going there because I never got along with his friends' kids. My brother did, but I never did. And I cannot tell you how many times I was in tears during those trips. And one of my fond memories of those horrible trips for me was at night, sitting either on a dock or at the top of the slide that we have a slide that's went down into the water. And so, or at least above the water, so you can slide off into it. And I would sit either at the top of that or on a dock, and I'd hold my knees and I'd be staring at the night sky. And the view that I had was the water flowing out, and in the middle, there is like a path because there's trees on this side where the land surrounds the lake. And then there was an island on this side that came all the way around. So I knew it was an island, but you couldn't tell it was an island. It just looked like a path between trees where the water went through, and the moon and stars would be shining in the sky. And I always use that time to reflect. Like, okay, am I really the bad guy here, or are people really being mean to me, right? And trying to figure out how to deal with all the stuff that happened with those other kids during the day. Um, and so for me, the moon has always been about reflection, about that inner work that we do um, in the darkness of night, where we have to look harder, okay, at the truth, of ourselves and of the situations around us. And so that's kind of the approach that I ended up taking with the moon. And I'm going to share now my image. Let's see this one. So this is the one that I posted on um, Instagram this week. I did pull in some things from the Wade Smith image. There is our dog and our wolf in the background, the path divided by the trees versus, say, towers, and the moon reflected on the water. Um, I struggled a lot with this because at first I wanted to create that image from my mind, right, with the slide and or the dock and all of that. But I've also had this experience. There was a part of the lake where we stayed sometimes by ourselves, where the grass went right up to the water, and I would just sit on the grass. And so that was meaningful too. I debated whether or not the person should be looking up at the moon or not, but I couldn't find an image of them looking up at the moon. But I definitely wanted the hands around the knees thing. For me, that just was important. That's something that was just always there for me when I was doing it. And so today I have been playing with this some more, because I wasn't happy with the moon in particular. I think the moon needed to be more silver and less yellow. And so I did swap it out. And then as I was writing up the information for my guidebook on my deck, I realized that the face in the moon is important, because the face in the moon is wisdom. And I felt like wisdom needed to be represented. And there's wisdom to be found in the darkness, but we have to take the time to actually focus, because otherwise we're never going to see it. It takes longer than it might during the day when all is bright and shiny. Um, so is that the silhouette in the moon or the silhouette in the of the person that you're talking about, Amy? I had to play with the silhouette of the moon for quite a while. It's not exactly like I want it yet, but it was as close as I could get it with the time I had before we got together this morning. So one of the things that in the moon, okay, yeah, okay. Thanks, Kelly Bear. Um, yeah, so one of the things that we saw in some moon cards that I didn't particularly put in mind that we can talk about that comes up with the moon sometimes when you're reading is so we got a little bit of both, the moon and the person. And I think that it kind of relates more specifically to my situation when I pictured it, than say someone looking up at the moon would. I kind of like the idea of the moon looking down on the person who is um, down, reflecting, trying to figure themselves out. Um, so I think I may leave it that way for now. Again, this is just a mock-up. I actually want to have these cards illustrated or painted eventually. Right now I'm contemplating, once I get all of them mocked up, just printing them on my playing cards and sending copies out to a few people for them to give me their impressions and ideas about the imagery that I've chosen, i.e. the elements that make up the cards, as well as what I've written about them, before I actually invest in having someone illustrate them further. Um, so one of the things that we can talk about with the moon is also magnetism. How the moon is attracted to the earth, and it creates the tides, and there are the cycles of the moon. So all of those things are things that can come up in a reading about the moon. It's not just about the image on the card, but what is it that we relate to the moon, right? And I think that's why this card can be so confusing, is because it is about confusion in itself a little bit. And there are so many directions that we can go with it. Some people have a more positive vibe during the night than they do during the day. Some people prefer one to the other. And so I think that can impact how they view those particular cards, right? Some people might not like the stark, bright way in which the sun reveals everything, right? Just looking over my notes that I took to see what, if anything, I haven't talked about that I was wanting to talk about. Oh, so I did have something I wanted to share, and of course, I did not bring it up with me. But in her book, Cassandra Snow, in Queering the Tarot, which I highly recommend, even if you're not part of the LGBT community, it sheds some valuable light on the cards themselves. Apart from her relating it to the queer experience. And when she talks about the moon, I think what she says about it was very profound. And basically, she says, I reject the idea that this is about lunacy. And she goes into some explanation why. And what she stated was so familiar to what I feel about the moon, and it is a reflective time, and it is a space in which we dig deep, and which it takes longer for us to come to terms with things, simply because, one, the moon represents a cycle, but also because there is less light. Thank you, Kelly Bear. I wasn't sure what she went by. I do follow them on Twitter as well. Let's see. So those are my thoughts on the moon. Do you guys have any thoughts about the moon? Maybe things I haven't chatted about yet, or that are important to you? And since you're here, and you missed the first part of the video, where I talked about what's been going on lately and all, I'll go ahead and ask my questions again and make my announcements while I see what feedback any of you might have about the moon. One question that came up for me this week was, in the Numinous Tarot, which I blame Kelly Bear for, is now one of my favorite decks I work with all the time, but um, in the star card, the scarf that she's wearing is the alchemical earth sign, and I don't understand why alchemical earth would be associated with the star, being the Aquarius card. And I am trying to figure that out. So if you guys know why earth might be associated with the star, let me know. That's probably the only thing in that deck that is really disturbing me. Now, it's interesting. I have a VR coming up in the next couple of weeks. And initially, I was going to do a tag about gateway decks, decks that led me to being open to other decks. And there actually is a tag going around now called Not My Tarot Aesthetic. And so I'm gonna use that tag, and maybe add mine onto it too, because it's basically the same idea. Cards that you never thought you would work with, but you actually are loving. Because I found last night, I'm looking at decks I've rejected numerous times since I started working with this particular deck. So that's an idea, Amy. It is possible. Because the way they drew it, it looks like she's in clouds. So maybe it's making it tangible. Yeah. Yeah. So the other thing, and I don't know if either of you have studied runes or worked with runes, but if anybody sees this in playback, maybe they will uh Kelly Bear. um I always knew that the last two letters in the runic alphabet, there was some dispute as to which came first. But when I got these runes from the Witch's Roots this week, they actually reversed the meaning of those two runes, which is something I'd not seen before. I've seen them reversed in order in the alphabet, but they've always had the same meaning. And so that's a little weird to me. Degas being daylight or um, awakening, and then Athalo being home, inheritance, ancestry, that kind of thing. So if anybody out there has any ideas about that reversal of meaning, I don't. I'm not sure that I've seen that anywhere else other than from the Witch's Moon this week. So those are the questions that I had earlier today. I will be on vacation this week, so I will not be doing the card study this week. I will actually be doing it next week and posting on the 24th about the Four of Wands, our card of celebration. This should be fun. It's interesting. I keep having this cycle sort of in my tarot study here where I have one card that's just really deep and confusing and takes a long time to wrap my head around. And then I get a card that's fun. So hopefully that will be our experience through the next, wow, we only have 69 weeks left. This card actually popped out when I was shuffling earlier, so I went ahead and grabbed it. And I now remember why it popped out. This was the card in my blue box deck that this was my first deck ever that I've been pulling them from for this project. And it had got damaged. And I actually tried on 3 separate occasions to replace the card so I didn't have to buy the deck again because I didn't want a duplicate deck. I just wanted to be able to use the deck I had. And if I got another deck, it would be a different deck, which is how I ended up collecting what now 80 decks. And so that's why it popped out. It's actually damaged, but I'm happy to work with it. I love this card, and it'll be a upbeat from the moon, which has just taken over my life all week. Some cards do that. Like the moon came up in my study of the Kabbalah this week when I was looking for a project, and it came up again in several readings leading up to the week. And then, and then it just became like this very difficult thing to study, right? I mean, looking at 20 different books with 20 different meanings for it and all of that. So tomorrow for National Coming Out Day, I will be doing a live at 6 p.m. So it's probably going to be in the middle of the night for Kelly Bear and those in the UK. But I tried to do it at a time where I could capture some of my fans in Australia, as well as those here because we're 12 hours apart. And I'll be talking about very personal things, and there'll be more information about the trip that I'm taking where I will be teaching a tarot class, as well as things about me that I've only revealed pieces of along the way. So, yeah, definitely, Kelly, sleeping the night away. Let's see, where is there? So, and then on Wednesday, I start my vacation. So I haven't decided yet if I'm going to record that class to put on YouTube later or not, because it's kind of a specific class. And I'll tell you about it tomorrow when I get personal at 6 p.m. EST here on Good Journeys Tarot. Until next time, everyone who's watching out there, good journeys. I want to thank Amy and Kelly Bear for their contributions today. It's always great to chat with you ladies. Y'all have a great rest of your day.